best for you.
Yeah.
Welcome to Marriage Monday.
Yes, welcome to Marriage Mondays with Nick and Trina Preston. I'm glad to be back with y'all after a weekend. Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the holiday was celebrated. And we just come back to you with a lesson about resentment in marriage. How are you going to address it? How it's caused, and things you need to do to hopefully get over it.
Yeah, it can be a real problem. Holding resentment, it does harm to you and to your spouse. So we do want to talk about how to recognize it because it is something that's kind of silent. So we do want to talk about it, give you some tools to recognize it, and some suggestions of how to move forward. This topic is being addressed in our general church lessons that Bishop Bush is teaching on. So we encourage you to definitely look on the church website and look at those. There's a lesson, a couple of lessons on dealing with resentment, and also the downside of agape. Y'all forgive my voice. I've got a little crud going on, but it's all good.
And the topic that he's been speaking on through the week is dealing with relational resentment, which lends itself to Marriage Mondays and what we could talk about with you all tonight. But we do encourage you to go and listen to those series of messages that he has on our church website, so you can get the gist of what he's talking about. I mean, Facebook page and YouTube. You can find him on YouTube also.
That's right.
So we just want to direct y'all there, but we're going to talk about just how to make it more applicable to marriages. So that's what we're here to do tonight.
So we think it's an important lesson. Have you ever felt resentment? What's your experience with resentment? I didn't give you no time to think about it.
No, you didn't. You put me on blast right there. At some point in my life, I have felt resentment. Probably, definitely in the marriage at some point, where something has been said or done that I really didn't appreciate it, but then addressed it at the time, and just kept it, under wraps. But I'm sure resentment has definitely been a part of my feelings towards you in this marriage, and we are learning through this that resentment is one of the biggest things that can help destroy marriage, basically.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what goes on the inside can really show up eventually on the outside, and that's the thing about resentment, is that it kind of resides and sits there silently for a long time, in contrast to anger, which can show up right away and be visible even on your countenance, on your face. It's very visible that anger can come forth. But resentment is kind of anger that brews and kind of you stew in it, and it's kind of it's internal.
Right, it's unresolved.
It's unresolved. Unresolved forgiveness. The absence of forgiveness.
Right.
Yeah, even after, so the thing about that, though, which I know we're going to talk about forgiveness probably next week. We keep saying that, but we really don't do it. One thing about forgiveness is if you don't address forgiveness in an effective way, what happens is that forgiveness is unresolved, and that unresolved forgiveness lingers even though you've gone through the motions of saying that you forgive or that you are forgiven. But if it's not true and sincere, you give place for resentment. And so what we want to do, because sometimes you might not even realize right away that that's what you're doing, is harboring resentment. And so tonight we want to talk to you about some signs of resentment, because you might recognize these behaviors in your relationship, either you towards your spouse or vice versa, your spouse towards you. And we want you to recognize that the behaviors you're seeing are attached to resentment. And so let's just call a spade a spade. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with your spouse. And so we're going to talk about some of these tonight. You want to start off?
Before we get to the signs, let's talk about a few causes. And we're just going to list the causes. We're not going to go in depth in those because some of them are pretty self-explanatory.
And it's not an exhaustive list by any means. It's just a handful.
Right. And one of the things that causes resentment is betrayal. whether you are, financially you betray your relationship, or sexually you betray your relationship. But what betrayal can cause resentment. Also, hurtful words, what you say to each other, can cause resentment in your marriage. And I think that's one of the things that I dealt with us, was, the words that were being said. The words were being said were intended to be helpful, but my perception of them was, you're trying to be hurtful. And so that could have built up some resentment in that regard, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Well, what's interesting that you said there is that it can even be a misinterpretation of that person's intentions.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to, we've talked a lot about, growing up differently. Because in my family, you just, had to have tough skin. You just say what it is, and that's just what it is. We just tend to be a lot more direct. Most of the people in my family are very direct. And so my feelings aren't hurt if you come to me and say, you got spinach between your teeth, you need to do something about that. I don't take that as something offensively. But somebody else might take that to be, why are you embarrassing me? Mm-hmm. Or why would you say that to me? Or why would you say it like that? Or you didn't have to say anything about it at all. It just depends. Different people grow up different ways. I know people that they don't do confrontation. They won't, they don't even really broach confrontation. They avoid it at all costs. And, I'm from the school of thought that let's go on and duke this out and let's get it over with and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I'm not the pilot on person anymore. Hey, what we got going on, let's go ahead and handle it now. Mm-hmm. So we don't have the pile-up effect that resentments get piled up on top of.
But we had to get to that place.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Because before, you wouldn't hardly say anything.
Yep, and then
even
when
if
I'm
trying to pry it out of you, you ain't got no complaints, everything's fine. When you know it's not, and so we both had to get to a place to where we're able to be sensitive to each other, and finding a way to handle those issues that need to be handled without causing damage to one another.
All right. And another thing that causes resentment is lack of support.
Yes.
You're not supporting each other's dreams, or each other a job, or what they want to do, the goals they set.
For me, it was lack of support with the household.
Oh yeah.
That definitely bred resentment. Mm-hmm. It's like, we have these things that we've endeavored to do together, and, children, the household, those things. But then there's a lack of support. From my perception, I perceived it to be a lack of support. And that did cause resentment because things had to be done, but then I'm having to do them without the support that I counted on having. And, I'm doing the things, but resentment is growing even in your absence. Mm-hmm. And see, you may not even realize the chips were being continually stacked against you. The more I'm having to juggle everything, deal with everything emotionally, and not having that support, and then getting pushed back when I try to confront it. So yeah, that definitely led to resentment.
And I think this is one of the things that really led us to counseling the first time, because I wasn't hearing her. I was not hearing her. Because I'm like, well, I'm going to work every day, and I'm coming back and doing my fair share that I think is enough, but it wasn't. I wasn't hearing her. So that kind of led us to counseling, and mm-hmm. and I heard somebody else say it from another point of view, and that helped me to understand what she was going through. And I think some of that came from when we went to FCA camp too, because I heard other people going through some of the same things. Being in that coaching world, some of the other wives were saying some of the same stuff my wife was saying. So it was obviously something there. So, I started to listen a little better. And so we resolved some of that stuff over time. It wasn't a quick turnaround. It took a little while to make that happen.
Indeed.
All right. Not prioritizing a relationship, that can lead to some resentment. Ooh-wee.
Or even being prioritizing it differently.
Right. Yeah.
One person prioritizes a relationship higher than the other. That can be a cause of resentment.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's all you want to say about that one? And one other thing is inconsiderate behaviors. Yeah, we had a discussion about this one the night before we came on, and one of the behaviors that we talked about, and we've mentioned it on here a couple of times, is the toilet seat. And that's one of those inconsiderate behaviors that if you just put a little time and effort in, you can correct it. And we just thought about that one as far as something that can cause resentment. Right?
Agreed.
All right. So, based on that list we just gave y'all, What are some signs that this is going on in your relationship? Because you need to be able to see resentment being built up in your relationship. You may not be aware of it. It may be something that you've done, something you said, like the list we just went through, but the other person may give you signs that something about what you're doing is just not right with me. Mm-hmm. And the only person you got to study is your spouse when you're talking about resentment in marriage. Right. And that's where we're coming from. These principles can be used in other relationships, but the most important thing, if you're married, is your spouse. So you need to know what that person is feeling and what that person is going through and the signs that they may be actually harboring resentment in a relationship. So what are some of those things?
Well, feelings of anger and frustration, and I would say repeated feelings of anger and frustration. That is definitely a sign to indicate that there may be some resentment in your relationship. Another one is comparing your partner to others, feeling jealous of other people's relationship. These are some red flags that there might be some resentment in your heart, or that your spouse might feel some resentment. Giving your partner the silent treatment. You're going to jump in at some point, right?
That's one right there
that's
that
yours,
we can talk about. Yeah, that's solid. Yeah, that's why you asked. That's why you stopped at that one and asked me about it.
No, it's not. I stopped because I was wondering if you were going to pick up some of these.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on the silent treatment. I was good at the silent treatment. I would walk around this house for 2 or 3 days and not hardly say anything to her because I'm mad.
Face toe up.
Yeah, toe up from the floor up. I just don't want to say nothing to her because, some things you can say and you might not be able to come back from it, and you just walk around just mad.
Which builds resentment on both people's
both sides, yeah.
Alicia has a really good comment there. When you address your concerns and you don't see any changes or modifications, yes, ma'am. You just came down my street right there.
Cause resentment.
It does cause resentment. It's hence the toilet seat conversation.
Right.
Because why we got to keep having the same conversation? I already told you how I feel about it. We've come to an agreement, but then I'm not seeing changes.
Right. And
so it does cause resentment. So it's really two sides of that coin because on one hand, you have to own your part. You can only own your part of a given situation. And so if you let that build resentment in you and there's silent anger attached to it, that's something that I have to choose. I don't have to let that be a source of anger. I can choose to have a different response when I'm seeing that he's not doing that part of his agreement. One thing I have learned to do is, if that's the case, what I do is I go ahead and pray about it. Every time I see something that reminds me of a failure to follow through on something or not following up his end of the agreement, I just go ahead and pray about it. Lord, I thank you that my husband listens to my concerns and that he, I should be telling my secrets because he hits in here taking it in.
I'm listening to you just like they are, boo.
Okay, but I'm telling you what works. And I just say a little prayer right there that he hears my concerns and he cares about the things that concern me and that he favors me. I learned that from my mom. She said, pray that your spouse favors you. And so that can be a way to handle kind of those breaches that could lead to resentment. But we're not here to talk about that. We're going to focus on the signs of resentment. But I just kind of threw that in for free. That's just a strategy that I learned to use over time, so those things don't have to signal more anger. It can be a signal for you to do something more on the side of a resolution, something to resolve it.
Also, a sign is you got a partner that always uses you always or you never. you know, really, that should not be said in a relationship, because you don't always do something and you never do something. There's a little bit in one of those places that something is going on. But if your partner feel like
you're saying that there's some that always and never are not accurate,
right? They're not.
Okay.
I'm glad you clarified that.
We had a lot of words.
But you should not use those terms dealing with your relationship. You know, and if your partner is using it, then they may be building up some resentment to you.
Well, it's certainly a sign. It's a sign that your partner may have you or your partner might have some resentment if that's the way you start to talk about the problems that's going on. Well, you always do this, because that also indicates you keep a score.
Right.
That you're letting up these incidences build up. And so it's a way for you to recognize that, okay, maybe I'm harboring some resentment surrounding this issue. If when I'm talking about it, I gotta say that it's a continual process,
right.
That there are multiple offenses that I want to bring up and address. Mm-hmm. So that's a sign of resentment.
All right. Overthinking, or just thinking about your partner doing something over and over and over and over again.
Oh, like ruminating.
Yeah, ruminating. You should never. I should say never, but rumination does nothing but build up resentment, because all you're seeing is what your partner's doing wrong. They're in your partner, and when your marriage relationship, you should try to pick out the positive stuff your partner is doing, at least to balance off what may be going wrong.
But these are just that's just a sign that maybe you've got some resentment going on. If you're thinking about it,
right,
and obsessing over what that spouse is doing, you probably have some resentment attached. The same if you are passive aggressive. Ooh. That's a big one. Mm-hmm. I think we just ran over a lot of toes on that one. Being passive aggressive towards your spouse is an indication that you may have some resentment in your heart about towards your spouse. So that's a big red flag. Also, choosing not to prioritize your partner
and choose to do things with other people.
Yeah, choosing not to kind of avoiding doing things with them, or just choosing not to make them a priority. Sort of as a get back, you know, that's an indication of resentment. Avoiding your partner, such as coming to bed late, coming home from work late, and making yourself scarce when they are around. That can be an indicator that there's some resentment.
Could be.
Going to bed late, avoiding being with your partner, coming home late from work, stopping off at a restaurant, or, taking all these extra detours, instead of coming home to your family at the end of the day. Why are you avoiding coming home? 9 times out of 10, there's some resentment in your heart geared towards your spouse if you're avoiding being with your spouse.
Yeah, I've heard a young fella told me one time he would actually create a list of things to do before he went home, before he left work, so he didn't have to get home from work, where it'll cut down the time that him and his wife at the time was arguing. Sometimes they say he got to the door and turned around. I was like, oof. Boy, that's a lot of resentment there. I didn't realize it at the time, but that's what he was going through. Mm-hmm. So
it's that silent anger, just sitting inside, building up inside. And the funny thing about resentment is it's invisible. Right.
You don't see it on a daily basis. The partner don't look mad all the time, so you can't really pick it up from their behaviors, and unless you are specifically learning them and trying to pick them out. So if you see that your spouse may be doing some of the things, might be a good time to have a conversation.
Yeah, and recognize maybe there's some unresolved unforgiveness going on there. All right, what did Alicia say for the first time?
Do this.
Oh, you don't want to do that? Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, yeah.
My understanding of how resentment can be unhealthy is when it causes imploding, which means holding things inside that can lead to exploding, which means there is a spillover, volcano effect.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what it leads to. It's that silent anger that's just brewing inside, and it's growing and growing and growing. And at some point, it will explode.
Right.
It will explode, and it's not ever going to be pretty.
And Elder Dennis says resentment hides. It is silent.
That's right.
It does hide until something happens to make it come out, and then a lot more come out that may be detrimental to the relationship, and you don't want it to come out like that.
You do a lot of damage.
Right.
So but see, the key thing that we want to get across tonight is when you look at these behaviors that we're talking about, or these signs of resentment, it gives you an opportunity to intervene even within yourself before it gets to that point to where it spills over or explodes. Go ahead and examine yourself and see if you are holding some resentment towards your spouse. Recognize where that's coming from. And then we'll talk to you a little bit before we get off tonight about how to deal with it. But you really need to listen to those lessons that Bishop Bush has posted, because they go in a whole lot more detail about understanding what you can do about resentment and getting on the other side of it. So tonight we want you to be able to recognize if you fall into that category. 9 times out of 10, even if it's not with your spouse, it can be with other people in your family that you hold some resentment towards. It can be with coworkers or with friends. We want you to be able to be free of this, and so being able to recognize it is the first step. All right.
And Miss Mac, you use the word right there, vulnerability. We're going to get to that one in a second.
Yes, ma'am. I think Alicia's a counselor, if I'm not mistaken. That's why she's giving us the goods tonight. Keep giving it to us. We want your expertise. Yes, ma'am.
All right. Another sign is you're talking poorly about your spouse to maybe friends, co-workers, and people that you're around. That's one thing I will not do, is talk poorly about my spouse.
I appreciate that.
People. Never. That makes no sense to me. Why are you going to talk poorly about your spouse to other people?
Or making your spouse the butt of jokes when others are around.
Right.
By pointing out their flaws to others. That's an indication of resentment as well. Mm-hmm. Another one is losing sexual attraction to your partner. Of course, that could be for lots of different reasons, but that can point to some underlying resentment, to cut down on that attraction, because that resentment, that inner anger gets in the way. And here's another one.
Doing things you know that annoy or upset your spouse intentionally causes strife amongst you two. Mm-hmm. That means that you've got something going on in your spirit, that in your heart, that you need to get rid of, and it's resentment. And when Bishop was talking about this for the first time, he said resentment is a relationship killer. And I was like, my goodness, that word right there, amongst all the stuff we talk about with communication and all the other stuff, that one right there made it where, everybody can harbor resentment unless you are aware of it. And you don't understand, why do I feel like this about my spouse today? What have they done or showed me evidence of that's creating this dislike or just this, not necessarily known as resentment, but the way I feel about them? Why don't I feel this loving feeling towards my wife today or my husband? Mm-hmm. It's because you're harboring resentment. You got to get this out your spirit, and basically what he said, get it out your crawl. That's the old term. That's a country term. Get it out your crawl. So let's talk about the way to get it out your crawl.
Okay. Well, the first thing, let's talk about the bottom line to me is that it boils down to forgiveness. Mm-hmm. And we just cannot overstate the importance of being swift to forgive, particularly within your marriage, because you will have plenty of opportunities to forgive and to be forgiven within a marriage relationship. And so when you learn to be swift to forgive and also swift to accept forgiveness, because sometimes we are kind of beat up on ourselves and that puts us in a bad position as well. But be ready to forgive. Be ready. Don't get so caught up in being mad with your spouse that you're not able to forgive.
Right.
You want to get in the habit of being quick to forgive and quick to get over whatever it is that you were upset about. And you want to get to a point that you have true forgiveness, not just lip service, not just, all right, yeah, I'm sorry, that's fine, or I get, accepting somebody saying they're sorry, I guess I forgive you, and still being angry about it on the inside. And then when that offense or something similar happens again, you're building up. That resentment starts to grow internally, even if you're not verbally talking about it. Mm-hmm. And so forgiveness is the key.
Right.
You have to learn how to forgive, and learn how to ask to be forgiven as well. That's what we were talking about apology, which we're going to talk about that.
The 5 signs of apology.
Or that's what it's called. Languages.
5 languages of apology. Yeah, we're going to get into that too.
Because there's different ways to apologize, and different ways that people look to for a person to really be able to forgive. Of course, forgiveness is your choice, but for someone to truly accept your apology, it has to be packaged a certain way to communicate true apology or being apologetic to that person.
And that can help empty that resentment bucket too.
It really can.
I mean, they open it up and say, okay, I'm really gonna forgive them for that, and it's basically how that comes.
Well, once you know what your spouse needs to be forgiven, or to forgive you, what you know they need for an apology, give them what they need. Package it the way they want. If I'm sorry don't mean anything to your spouse, then you got to find the right way to express apology for your spouse. And once you know that way that works for them, always go back to delivering apologies based upon what they need. Because that forgiveness piece is critical. We're accountable ourselves to forgive, whether we like the way they ask for forgiveness or not. We're still accountable for forgiveness. So it can't be an excuse, well, you didn't apologize, so I wanted you to. And that can be true, because I'm like that. Don't come to me talking about you sorry and then don't make no change. But if you ask for forgiveness as a child of God, I got to do like my Father and forgive. Uh-huh. God forgives us, and we're obligated to forgive as well. There's so many scriptures in the Bible. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ has forgiven you. And that's in Ephesians. But there's so many scriptures that we must forgive. We're obligated as children of God to be like He is, which is to be a forgiver. Mm-hmm. Our very relationship with Christ is based upon forgiveness. That starts the relationship, for that forgiveness and that belief in Christ. That that something spiritual happens when we ask God for forgiveness. That's the catalyst to get things, or the initiation to get things going with God, is that asking for forgiveness. Right.
Mm-hmm. And another point that we want to make about how to get resentment out of your marriage. One thing we need to understand about resentment also, that our bishop also mentioned, was that resentment can be like a defense mechanism. Mm-hmm. Because people have been hurt, they've been done, you haven't been done right in a relationship, or in a previous relationship you was done a certain way that your new relationship may be trying to manifest based on your perception of it. But one thing you have to do with resentment, so it doesn't carry over into in other relationships, is, especially with your spouse, is you have to stay vulnerable to love. You have to give yourself permission to love again. You have to open your heart up, so you don't get to a point where everything that happens to you is cold, and you treat every situation the same, because it's hard to continue on a relationship with somebody based on what somebody else has done. That's pretty hard to do, because it's hard to continue a relationship or be in a relationship based on what somebody else has done to you, because I don't know what that person has done. Not me.
Are you talking about previous relationships?
Yeah, previous relationships. Okay. And you taking those resentful feelings into that relationship, and that person don't understand why you acting so aggressively towards them. Mm-hmm. You have to learn to forgive that, what the other person done did, and be vulnerable to love so you can continue a relationship with the next person. Now, we're not telling y'all to be subject to abuse. We never preach that. But, give the person that you're with a chance to prove themselves that they're going to protect you and your feelings as long as y'all have open communication and really trying to love each other.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance of guarding your heart and being vulnerable to love. It's a delicate balance. And I feel like it requires living a spirit-led life. Because when you really do allow the Holy Spirit to lead you in making those choices, because love is risky. Mm-hmm. You never get to the good side of love without taking a risk. And that risk is where we get to that point of vulnerability can only happen when we're able to lessen, kind of to let our guard down some. Mm-hmm. And so there's a balance to guarding your heart and being vulnerable.
Right.
But you can experience love the way we want to experience love without having that element of vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so stay vulnerable to love.
Right.
Especially in a marriage. You have to. Yeah, you can't harden your heart against your spouse. You have to you gotta put yourself out there sometimes.
Right. So that's the lesson, isn't it?
Pretty much. So go back and listen to those lessons. We honestly didn't even do the lesson justice. We gave y'all a very, very tiny corner of this lesson, but we did want to heighten your awareness, which is what we always try to do, so that you can recognize resentment in your own life or in your own marriage. Go back and listen to those lessons that Bishop Bush has online. Once again, we are Crown Kingdom Cultural Center. That's the name of our church ministry and the name of our church Facebook page. The website is www.fbjm.org. That stands for Finest Bush Junior Ministries, fbjm.org. So we encourage you guys to take part in those videos that are posted, and they're posted there for you. So get that information. You're welcome, Alicia. Thank you for your contributions tonight too. I always love having a professional opinion because we're only here as lay people. So we always welcome professional perspectives as well, especially from Christians. So, but that's the main thing I want to say is to make sure. We also want you to share these videos so we can get the message out far and wide. People need this information, so share it with people so that they can use it to make their relationships better as well.
All right, and just a little side note. Last week I had a conversation with two of my young folk that watch us pretty diligently, and me and my wife were talking about a situation. And they thought I was using them to talk to you all about. I just want to tell my folk that I don't use y'all relationships. Y'all talk to me about something, I don't use it in the broadcast. And I just want to, and it was funny when we were talking about it, all I could do was laugh because them two were funny to me. I'm talking about y'all now, but them two were funny to me. She don't know who I'm talking about, but I just want to say, it's all love to y'all too. I really do love y'all too.
Well, keep in mind, I would say too on that note that we've been working with couples for a very long time. Mm-hmm. We've been at Crown with 14 years, Charity 16, so 14 years at Crown. Mm-hmm. And then before that, like 8 years. Several years before that at the previous church ministry, we were a part of the marriage ministry. So we have actually worked with a lot of couples, and a lot of the issues that couples go through do look the same.
They do.
So sometimes if we're referencing somebody that we have had experiences with, please don't take it personally, because 9 times out of 10 we're not talking about you.
Not talking about you.
Yeah, but the situations are very much the same in a lot of relationships, which is why this is valuable for us to share with y'all our experiences, because y'all are having similar experiences too, or you will possibly have those experiences too. So Yeah, but we love y'all. We appreciate your support. We appreciate that you value these lessons. So we pray y'all have a good week.
Oh, yeah.
And that you won't harbor resentment.
No. That's it. From the lady and the coach, we love y'all. Good night.